There we go. All right. So we basically left off with getting our UV unwrap for this guy in pretty good shape. One of the things I did want to take a little bit more of a look at before we move on to unwrapping the gear is kind of maybe adjusting some of the other feet a little bit more. I just want to play a little more with that live UV unwrap. So remember, one of the things you want to do to see your UVs, because you'll notice you can see the distortion grid here, but you don't really see the UVs. So you just need to go, like, say, to 3 for face mode, Control A, right? Because remember, Control A selects all, right? That's your select menu, select all, right there, and that's Control A. And that will let you see your UVs over in here. Now remember, in Blender, you can always grab kind of these little windows here, and if you need more space or less space, you could do that, right? So if you grab kind of right there where it gives you kind of little double arrows pointing left and right, you can make this bigger or smaller, right? We've seen that for the texture painting window as well. So if you want to focus mostly on 3D painting, you can make the UV painting area a lot smaller. So just kind of remember, you can always easily just adjust the size of the windows for whatever you want to focus on a little more. And we're at the point where we're focusing a little more on UVs, so we'll kind of make sure the UV editor is a little bigger. And of course, we're in the UV editing workspace. This is one of the great things that they did for the Blender 2.8 series. As long with a lot of other things, just the overall interface now is excellent, really quite user-friendly. So yeah, as well as kind of a lot of other small things that have been great rebuilds for Blender to make it super fun and enjoyable to work in. But yeah, so remember, we kind of saw this a little bit the other day, the UV ability to kind of pin stuff and move it around, right? And I did it a little bit on the feet there. Overall, even if we didn't do that, we'd still be in pretty good shape. The distortion's not too bad on these. But I figure it's never a bad idea to get you guys to practice and play with this a little bit more. So remember, one of the things you could do is go to the UV menu, right? So there's, of course, the UV menu here, and you could check on live unwrap, right? So you see, you just click on it, and it checks it on, because it's meant to be live, so it's an interactive tool. And then really all you have to do is pin some verts, right? So 1 for vertex mode. And if I want, I could kind of pin a vertex back here. So you just select some vertices, right? So shift left click, shift left click, shift left click. And you notice in this case, I'm kind of doing it for like the toes and in between the toes and the back. And if you right click, right, that brings up the UV context menu, and you'll see there is a pin feature here. And once I pin and I click off, you see the red now? Now the cool thing is I've got my tweak tool on, right? Remember, Q just toggles you through those. Of course, you can set those all to your own quick keys. And what I could do then is I could just tweak the pins, right? And you see how it actually makes these nice little adjustments for our toes. And you see this is probably for the bottom of the foot here. I think it's the front foot. And you see you can just kind of stretch these out to just kind of make sure that the distortion's a bit more minor. Sometimes, like, you notice how the toes on here look fairly elongated? They should look fairly elongated in a UV editor also. So if you get these really, really stubby toes when they shouldn't be, yeah, at the end of the day, if you left them, you'd still have UVs that are passable, good enough. But it takes an extra, like, minute to do this, right? And it's one of the neat features I just want to make sure you guys know that you have if you need to make some minor adjustments to stuff. So remember, you just select some vertices, right-click to pin them. And then, of course, make sure live unwrap's on, and then all you have to do is grab the actual pins with the tweak tool, and that allows you to make adjustments to it. Now, what I'll often do to clear the pins is I'll just do Control A, because we're in vertex mode, and then right-click Unpin, and then they're unpinned. And then if I want, I can go down and I can adjust it for the top of the foot. In this case, I think that actually, I think we did the tops of the foot already well. I think that might be for the top of this one. But just to remind you guys how it works, and you see live unwrap is still on. That's on until you uncheck it. So really, we're just, 1 for vertex mode, and then I'm just kind of selecting some verts. Kind of usually the ends of the toes, in between the toes. I usually, not that one. And I usually kind of put one on the heel. Right click, and it brings up the UV context menu, right? So remember, if your cursor is in the UV editor and you right click, it'll bring up the context menu for whatever selection type you are and then there. So if I want, I could pin. There we go. And then, of course, we can make these slight little adjustments if we want to, right? Where I can just kind of tweak this point, right? I'm pretty sure that's the bottom, the back foot. So we can always kind of make sure to visually get it more in our viewport there. And you see how I can just kind of adjust these and pull them. I feel like this one was actually already in pretty good shape. Like I said, the default unwrap algorithm in Blender is honestly pretty good. It's not the best I've seen, but it's a pretty darn good one. But the live unwrap's excellent. It's quite a good live unwrap feature. And that's where if you ever need to make adjustments, you can, right? I don't feel like we had that much major adjustments to do. I feel like maybe the top of one of these foots had a little more adjustments, but overall, it did quite a good job. But if you ever need to, that live unwrap feature can be great. And like I said, I'll just usually could do Control A to select all vertices, right click to unpin, that way they're all unpinned. And of course, I could go to UV and I could uncheck live unwrap because we don't want that to necessarily be on when we're not using it. And at this point, and I could go to, say, 4 if I want to for object level, that's island level, right? And I can do Control A to select everything. Now, you'll notice I've got the text tools stuff up, right? And in particular, in the text tools menu, the UV layout, if you want, you can actually sample really quick the texel density, right? This is for your texels. And that's really just kind of, it's called texture element, texel for short. And it's really just kind of looking at the ratio of pixels for each island and how much they get. And that's kind of what your each texture element's a little shell. How many pixels of the texture does that get? Generally, you want that to be pretty even. You don't want radical discrepancies between all your different stuff. Hey. Oh, thank you. No problem. Right. So normally you don't want your texels. You don't want your texels to have too much discrepancy, right? So sorry about that in the video recording. You guys will hear later on. But basically, the texel density you want to usually be fairly uniform. There are reasons to break that rule sometimes, particularly older video games where you wanted the face to have more detail because faces are important. You would actually give the face more a bigger texel space, right? It would get more pixels than it probably should normally if you're trying to keep the ratio pretty even between all of them. But that was a sacrifice they would make because, hey, we wanted the face to have enough detail to be expressive and close-up shots or whatever. And then, hey, if like the other things were blurrier and pixelated, not a big deal. Nowadays, because of how advanced video games are, the texel density is usually more one-to-one kind of thing where generally you want everything to be roughly the size it's supposed to be relative to the model itself so that each element's getting about the same pixel amount, right? So that's kind of good. You can kind of just check there, hit apply so it makes minor adjustments. And then, of course, you can go to UV, right? And in UV, what we could do, of course, is we see that we've got pack islands. We just pack those. Sometimes I like to use a quick fill here also in the UV layout just to kind of maybe resize or repack everything there. You'll notice the packing never gets everything quite perfect, right? There's often a bit of room that you could take advantage of here, right? And one of the cool things is, remember, 1, 2, 3, 4 actually work as quick keys here for similar things, right? So even in your UV editor, 1's going to be for UVs, 2's going to be for edges, 3's going to be for faces, 4 isn't for objects, but it is for shells, right, or islands. It depends on what software you're using, right? A lot of packages call them islands because they're not connected to the other UVs, and I think that's a better name for it. And that's generally Blender calls it, right? Pack islands, all that stuff. Maya would call it shells for whatever weird, kind of dumb reason. But I think island is kind of a better name for it. And so what you could always do is you could always select these, W for move, although tweak will work, so you see I could just left-click drag on an island. And of course, all your tools work, so R for scale. And I could easily just go in here and adjust the positions for these a little bit more. right? Maybe I don't want this on its side here. I can hit E for rotate. Although, remember, you do have other tools in the text tools, right? So you see how I can actually rotate these 90 degrees or do alignment features. So keep in mind that text tools not only gives you the cool preview features here, which makes that setup a little easier. It gives you rectify, which kind of takes any pipes shapes and makes them perfect or really good, more rectangular shapes. But also you have some of these cool other features here. So believe it or not, you actually, and the baking is great in text tools. So the text tools is a great add-on. Love it. Very much one of the ones I recommend. And you notice I can kind of move this here. Now, in this case, I want to make sure to get as many pixels as I can, so I'm going to make my texels a little bit different, right? So I'm going to scale this foot up a little bit more, right? Now, you notice how I didn't scale it up radical amounts, right? I'm not trying to make it super gigantic compared to everything else. But if you're scaling your pieces, your islands up like maybe 15, 20%, you know, that texture element, that texels, it's getting a little bit more pixels. Really not the end of the world, right? The discrepancy is going to be not even really noticeable. If I scaled this up like 500%, like 5 to 6 times bigger, and I scaled everything else down to compensate for that, you're going to get a distinctly different texel ratio, right? That would definitely show up, right? You would see that maybe your body looks blurrier and lower resolution than your feet do. In this case, though, I'm just trying to take advantage of maybe scaling them up like 15, 20%, just so they take up a little bit more space, right? No reason you can't have them just get a little more space in there, right? Never hurts to get a little bit more in there, so don't be afraid to take advantage of that a little bit. You want to be careful, right? Don't make them gigantic compared to the other parts, but, you know, take advantage of a few extra pixels in a few spots, right? So don't be afraid to use Pack Island to get you a good start, and then just come back in here and say, hey, you know, I could kind of make minor adjustments just to take advantage of getting a little more pixels in here, right? So I'll often come back in there and just do a little bit of manual packing, and you see how just they take up more pixels, right? There's now more pixels directly that you're going to see on your model, right? That's a bit of extra pixels that each part will show up. But you notice how the checkerboards don't look really different, right? They still look like they have about the same density. So good idea to kind of understand what texels are what's going on with texels and texture elements, but you can make minor adjustments, and usually it's not going to be an issue. Nowadays, though, you don't want them to be radically different or radically larger or smaller, right? It's just kind of one of those things. I'll maybe rotate that one a little bit, maybe scale that one up a little bit there. But a little bit of distinct difference where maybe you cram a few more pixels into this foot, right? Ain't going to kill you. But you don't want a radically larger distortion of that. But it's a bit of a better, tighter pack. You're taking advantage and squeezing more pixels into what's actually going to show up on the model. Because remember, all of the areas, because this when we make textures later on, they're going to be square. So any areas where there's no UVs, right, those are pixels that are dead. They're not going to show up on the model, right? It's super, super hard without putting a ton more work in that's really not necessary in most pipelines to maximize and get just about every pixel in there. And you'll see film doesn't even care, right? They'll waste tons of pixels because they're like, we can have a 40 and 86 texture just for the hand, right? We're ILM, we're Weta. Video games, you do want to try to take up more space, but there is kind of a limit to how many pixels you're actually able to squeeze in there without causing a bunch of distortion. So keep that in mind. This will work as a pretty good pack. And of course, now that I'm good, I can go to 4 for object mode. I can go back to my blue wrench here for the modifiers. And I can just add a mirror modifier. There we go. And then we can hit apply all. And now, all those UVs are there. Now, you'll notice that they are on top of each other. So if I have 4 for here, you know, so I can kind of click on one and move it, and you see it's going to try to move both. But if I was to say go to, like, say 3, and I double-click, or, you know, select linked, going to be the same quick key here. Come on. Those should be on top of each other anymore. Let's see here. You'll notice that there are UVs on top of each other, right? So you will see that there actually are distinct amounts of UVs on there. They are on top of each other, if you maybe kind of be careful with that. But one of the things you could always do, like we saw here, is you can always go into, say vertex mode, and you say you grab one and move it. You can always do select linked, and those are welded together, it looks like. They shouldn't be. Just wanted to grab all of them. But if you need to unpack them or relay them out, remember, you can always go to UV, and you can always go to pack islands. Let's make sure everything's selected, though. And you see how everything is now not on top, right? And now you'll have unique, distinct UVs for each side. So keep that in mind, right? That's going to allow you to repack some of these things and reorganize them. In this case, I wanted to have them on both sides to maximize our texture. And of course, you can do some more organizations with them, but we're just going to keep it this way. But that's kind of what's going on with that, is we wanted the UVs to be on top of each other. Because what's going to allow us to do is, yes, we'll sacrifice asymmetry. Whatever we texture on this side will show up on that side, regardless of if symmetry is on or not up here. But it does mean that we can have a texture that's half the resolution that needs to be when it renders out, right? We're basically making the texture twice as big, because it's going to be on both sides. So we just kind of leave those there on top of each other. Like we said, if you need to, you can always kind of grab a vertex. Remember, up arrows will still work to kind of grab all that stuff. And you see how you can kind of pull it off. So they are on top of each other, but you can move them off if you need to, right? You can even see where overlap is, right? That'll select all the overlapping ones. So there are some cool little features in there. But we want to leave them on top. It's going to make our life easier. We'll be able to maximize how effective our textures are. All right. So I'm going to save that. And let's actually go do some UV unwrapping for our... But like I said, the sacrifice will be asymmetry. Your texture will have to be the same on both sides, which a lot of times is fine, right? Most things are reasonably symmetrical. But that is one of the sacrifices. You would have to kind of relay them out or specifically move the parts off and manually pack some stuff in there if you wanted some asymmetry. So any combination thereof is good, right? You can actually have it be fully symmetrical like this. You can have it all be asymmetrical, where you repack everything. And then you could have some parts not overlapping and some parts overlapping, so that you kind of get the best of both, where you'll still get your texture to act bigger than it really is in terms of actual pixel size. But the areas where you want asymmetry, by moving those UV islands off, you can still get that. All right, so let's go to quad gear. This will be pretty easy to knock out in a couple minutes. So there we go. And let me delete half, right? So we'll go to 3 face mode. And I'm just going to go in here and double click on a face, but usually close to the edge, right? If you do it close to the edge, that kind of gives it its direction, right? And of course, I can hit delete faces, double click, delete faces. And then there's this one down here, which we can see because of the symmetry got a little weird in there. I'm going to get rid of that. And then, of course, we can do select linked, get rid of that. And then we could always, of course, snap those, or when we mirror, it'll kind of do it for us. But I'm going to double click on those, delete faces. And then, of course, we can go in here and we could just select some polygons on these things, right? Select linked, delete faces, and, of course, select linked, delete faces. Of course, I'm using the quick key for select linked, but remember, it is right here. I changed it to spacebar because I like that, but by default, it's right bracket, right? All right. So now we've got this ready to go, and it's really just a question of, and remember, if you want to snap these really quick, You can always just go to 2 for edges, turn your move tool on, and remember you do have snapping tools, magnet, and I can actually switch it to increment and use absolute grid snap. And then you'll see that this snaps exactly to the grid. I can always open up this guy for flatten as well, but if you wanted to, you could always just grab each vertex and just quickly kind of snap them over. And then I'll make sure that they're all kind of snapped right there. You do have flatten, of course, which can help with those things also, but in this case, we're good. Remember, snap, and of course, increment, absolute grid snap. I can give you some cool functions there. All right. And now I really want to go in here and make some quick adjustments. So I'm going to go to the green triangle, so I can change this, double click on the UV map section, right? And we'll call this quad gear. That way later on, if we have to kind of assign UVs to a different texture, they're not all called UV map, right? Granted, even if they are, it's pretty good about knowing the object you're on for doing that. But labeling stuff so that you very quickly visually could say, hey, I know what that is. That's the UVs for the quad gear. Not bad idea. All right. Now in this case, the seams are going to be pretty straightforward. So I'm going to go to 2 for edge. Now, for me, I like to kind of just split this guy in half. You'll see some people that will do it as a full rectangle with triangles at the top, and I don't know if I prefer that myself. So I'm just going to double click there, toggle through the tweak tool, right click, mark seam. That way I can kind of pop the front and back of the eyeball apart. These should be okay on their own, but we'll probably want to make sure to kind of do a seam through here for the gear, right? So see how there should be a seam that kind of goes all the way through there, and then we should have one on the other side. So that way we can kind of split the inside and the outside. Now keep in mind, if you really, really want to make your model even more efficient polygonal-wise, you could easily delete a lot of these inner polygons, right? A lot of these are not even necessary, right? So keep that in mind as well, is that you might even find that you could actually take out some of these to make this more efficient. We haven't really done that, but say I go to 3 for face mode, and you know, I say grab that edge or that face, and I go to this face right here, X, I can hit delete faces. Then we can kind of maybe go from this face to here. Remember, I'm using select shortest path, right? Select link, shortest path. These are polygons you're never going to see, so sometimes you just go in here and say, hey, I'm going to get rid of the polygons that I don't need. So keep that in mind, is that sometimes it's really, there's ways you can make this more efficient, right? And then that one, just those guys, delete faces. Now I could select linked because I kind of, you know, boom, kind of did those. And then we could even do these ones right here if we want to, right? So I could easily just shift double click to grab a bunch of face loops there, delete faces. And you see how this is quickly becoming a more polygonally efficient model. That's polygons we're taking out to make this more efficient. We never see them, right? They're underneath the model. So sometimes look around for which ones are expendable, right? That'll save us a couple hundred triangles. So keep that in mind, right? That this stuff's available, that it's, and you saw how easy it was? It seriously took me like 20 seconds to do, right? All right, we could have used borders and then used the select loop inner region. That's actually quite useful and cool. But that's just now a little bit more efficient for us. So I'll go to 2 for edge mode again. And in this case, we could actually probably just use this border edge as kind of the seams for this. There we go. Technically, it probably doesn't need them, but I always mark just in case, so we can mark seam there. We'll probably need a seam right in here because that's just going to unwrap that a bit weird if we don't have one in there. probably do one right here. Mark seam. There we go. But otherwise, usually you'd put kind of a seam through here so that way it can kind of pop the outside and the inner one off into their own shells, their own islands, right? All right, so I kind of feel like that might give us a good start, but I might want to maybe let this be on its own as well. So mark seam. And I'm actually going to take advantage of having these kind of be popped open as well. So I'm going to mark seam there. And then if we want to, we could always just kind of grab 2 extra edges there. Maybe kind of go down to here for that. Remember, Alt-X is your X-ray quick key. There's that button right there, though. Right-click, mark seam. Alt-X, because that'll make it pretty easy to go in there and find what you want. Shortest path. Mark seam. And then just make it pretty easy just to kind of come in here and quickly grab a few of those just without having to worry. Now you notice I kind of split these so these tops can kind of come off and unwrap on their own. But then I kind of also needed to make sure that this more cylindrical shape kind of unwraps like a label from a bottle. In fact, if you look at these seams, they mimic the label off of an actual bottle, like a water bottle, a soda bottle, quite well. And that should actually be a pretty good start for our unwrap for these. We'll check it out here in a minute, see how well it does for us. So we hit 3 for faces, Control A. And then, of course, we can go to UV, unwrap, unwrap. We see it looks like it did a pretty good job. And, of course, we can go to text tools here. Our size is already set to 2048, but remember you can pick different presets. We could do checker map preview. And you notice how that did a pretty good job. Right? So we got that nice checkerboard look to it. The only area that's a little bit off is kind of this top area here. So that might be one of those areas. Maybe you look at doing a little bit of live UV unwrap too to adjust it. Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where you just kind of figure out what you like. We might even break it up a little bit more. Sometimes you might just put a little extra seam somewhere else just to help it. I kind of feel like that's not going to be too big a deal for us. I think maybe we'll do a smidge more to tinker with this on the next video because we're going a little long today. So I feel like we'll stop for the moment there because I do want to do a little bit more to this one before we're done. So yeah, we'll stop there and we'll kind of do a little more tinkering to it on our next video, next lecture. All right.